Before you scroll, imagine this: a child collapsing in the arms of one of the most powerful men in Los Angeles, a man who has seen it all, controlled it all, yet nothing in his life could have prepared him for what was about to happen. That morning at the U.S. Bank Tower would change everything, even before the city's pulse had truly started to beat. It was an ordinary Tuesday. The streets outside were alive with the familiar rhythm of Los Angeles. Yellow cabs honked impatiently, coffee trucks steamed in the early light, and suited professionals hurried along the sidewalks, clutching tablets, briefcases, and ambition. Inside the U.S. Bank Tower, sunlight poured through the towering glass walls, reflecting off the polished marble floors and sleek steel accents, casting the lobby in a golden haze that made the city seem almost too perfect, too orderly. But order was about to shatter. Alexander Royce, billionaire CEO, was walking through the lobby as if he owned every inch of it. He didn't really need to; in many ways, he did. His life was a series of calculated steps, schedules, and meticulously planned meetings. Every corner of his world reflected control, his wealth, his influence, his reputation. Today was no different. He checked his watch, adjusted his cufflinks, and strode forward with the same confidence that had propelled him to the top of the corporate ladder. The assistants, used to his silent scrutiny, flitted around him like shadows, anticipating his every need. Then the elevator doors opened, and the rhythm of the lobby fractured. Out stepped a tiny figure, no taller than the reception desk, clutching a worn-out backpack that looked like it had survived years of wear and tear. Her hair, a tangled mix of brown and sun-streaked strands, fell into her eyes as she looked around, hesitant, uncertain. Her small sneakers scuffed softly against the marble floor, but it was the sheer fragility of her presence that made the moment surreal. A little girl, seemingly misplaced in a world of power suits and glossy tiles, had just entered Alexander's universe. For a brief second, time slowed. Alexander's stride faltered, though he didn't realize it. He observed the girl with curiosity tinged with unease. Something about her presence was different. She didn't belong here. She shouldn't belong here. And yet, there was something in her gaze that demanded attention, though he couldn't yet name it. The lobby, usually a corridor of businesslike efficiency, grew still. The murmurs of assistants paused mid-step. A man with a briefcase froze as he adjusted his tie. A security guard instinctively took a step forward. Everyone sensed the subtle shift in the atmosphere, the hush that only comes when the unexpected intrudes on the ordinary. And then it happened. Without warning, the girl swayed. Her eyes fluttered shut. In one fluid motion, she collapsed, landing gently against Alexander's chest. His reflexes, honed from years of business and perhaps from a lifetime of guarding himself against surprises, kicked in immediately. He caught her, instinctively shielding her from the marble floor. The lobby gasped. Some people whispered, some simply stared. Phones were lifted almost automatically as witnesses tried to capture the moment, but the scene refused to be captured in pixels alone. There was a tangible weight in the air, a quiet chaos that spread through the room, and yet Alexander held her firmly, almost instinctively. He could feel her small, fragile body trembling against him. Her breath was shallow. Her tiny hands clutched his suit jacket, as though seeking anchor in a world she had barely stepped into. Someone call for help, a voice finally broke through the stunned silence, but Alexander's mind was elsewhere. He was not thinking about protocol, or media, or appearances. He was focused entirely on the little girl in his arms, on the sudden, sharp reality of vulnerability pressing against him. The polished calm of the morning, the meticulous order he cherished, had been shattered in a heartbeat. No one knew why she had fainted. Perhaps it was the heat, the nerves, or hunger. Perhaps it was something far deeper, something hidden beneath the surface that only the girl carried, silently. Alexander had seen countless emergencies, faced crises that demanded strategic thinking, yet this moment, the fragility of life so small, so unguarded, was unlike anything he had encountered. It cut through his armor, through the meticulous shields he had built over decades. People began to gather, forming a semicircle around them. The receptionist had stepped forward, her hand hovering over the panic button, yet she paused. The scene was unusual, intimate even, in a place designed for transactional interactions and brief greetings. Alexander remained still, almost motionless, cradling her as if moving too quickly would risk the world tipping further. Time, in that lobby, became elastic. Seconds stretched into eternities. Thoughts raced through Alexander's mind. Who was this child? How had she ended up here, in this glass and steel fortress of wealth and power? What secret did she carry that had led to this moment? And most importantly, what would he do next? The murmurs grew louder, yet no one dared interfere. There was a strange, unspoken understanding that this moment was not just a fainting spell, it was an introduction, a collision of worlds that should never have met. Alexander's pulse quickened, not from panic but from the recognition that something profound was unfolding. He had faced boardroom battles, market crashes, betrayals, and victories. Nothing had prepared him for this sudden intrusion of humanity, so raw and unfiltered, into his carefully controlled life. And as the girl's eyelids fluttered, and her breathing began to steady, Alexander realized that the story behind her fainting was far more significant than anyone in the lobby could imagine. There was a truth hidden beneath those small, fragile features, a secret that, once revealed, would challenge not only his perspective of power but also the very core of his existence. The city outside carried on, indifferent to the quiet drama in the lobby of the U.S. Bank Tower. People hurried past, some glancing curiously through the glass walls, oblivious to the profound moment taking place inside. Alexander held the girl, his mind racing with questions and unease. He didn't yet know what lay ahead, but instinctively, he understood one thing: life as he knew it was about to change, and nothing in his meticulously planned world could prepare him for the truth about this little girl. Before anyone could realize the gravity of the morning's chaos, Alexander Royce had already led the little girl to his office, the glass walls offering a dizzying view of Los Angeles sprawling endlessly below. From this height, the city seemed to pulse with life, lights and traffic blending into a shimmering mosaic that reflected both his achievement and the distance he had traveled to reach it. Yet, as impressive as the skyline appeared, it did little to mask the emptiness he often felt behind the tailored suits and glossy veneer of success. He set the girl gently onto the edge of the leather sofa near his desk, making sure she was steady. She sat there, eyes wide, clutching the worn-out straps of her backpack as if it were a lifeline. Alexander stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, letting his gaze drift over the city. The office was immaculate, everything in its place, a testament to order and discipline. Yet the opulence and control he had surrounded himself with could not shield him from the stirrings in his chest, a sudden awareness that life's true fragility had just walked into his world. Alexander's mind raced, unwilling to settle on a single thought. He had conquered boardrooms, stock markets, and corporate rivals with a calculated precision few could rival. Yet here, holding a child who didn't belong in his meticulously curated universe, he felt a vulnerability that had eluded him for decades. The calm, confident man known for making million-dollar decisions in seconds now found himself questioning something far more complex: how a single, small human could command so much of his attention and unsettle the very rhythm of his life. He recalled the countless sacrifices that had shaped him. Nights spent hunched over financial reports, cities traversed in private jets, friendships traded for business opportunities. Each choice, each risk, each victory had built the empire he now surveyed from above. And yet, with every triumph came isolation. The relationships he had nurtured were often shallow, tied to convenience or ambition, and the people who had promised loyalty had frequently vanished when challenges arose. Alexander had grown accustomed to solitude, to the quiet ache of power without companionship. But this little girl had arrived unannounced, unfiltered, and unbound by the rules he had spent a lifetime mastering. The girl, Emily, looked up at him with eyes that seemed impossibly large for her small face, the faint traces of tears and exhaustion still visible. There was a raw honesty in her expression, a vulnerability that required no words yet spoke volumes. Alexander realized, in that instant, that this encounter was more than chance. It was a collision of worlds. The controlled, polished life of a man who had everything and the raw, unpredictable existence of a child who had nothing yet carried more resilience than he had ever known. He sank into the chair behind his desk, still holding her gaze. The walls around him displayed accolades, framed photographs of high-profile deals, and the occasional art piece meant to convey taste and sophistication. They told the world a story of success, yet none of them could have conveyed the emptiness that often lingered when the doors were closed and the city below seemed both so close and yet impossibly distant. Now, with Emily's small presence in the room, Alexander felt the first crack in the polished facade of his life. The questions gnawed at him: who had placed her in this position? Why now? How had fate, or misfortune, led her straight into his arms on a day that had seemed ordinary, even mundane, at first glance? He studied her, noticing the faint freckles across her nose, the slight tremor in her hands, the way she hugged her backpack as if it were a shield. Every detail was a reminder that this was not just a child in need of temporary attention. She carried a story, a hidden world of struggle, determination, and survival that had somehow reached his doorstep. Alexander, accustomed to interpreting financial statements and business reports with surgical precision, now found himself attempting to decipher something infinitely more complex: the life of a child whose presence was foreign to his world yet strangely magnetic. As the minutes stretched on, Alexander's thoughts began to wander further into introspection. He remembered his early days, before the rise to wealth and influence. Back when ambition was pure and mistakes were instructive rather than potentially catastrophic. Back when life had been messy, vibrant, and painfully human. The contrast between that life and the one he now inhabited was stark. He had sought control to shield himself from disappointment and unpredictability, yet in doing so, he had also shielded himself from moments like this, moments where raw humanity demanded acknowledgement, where the unexpected could pierce through layers of armor. Emily shifted slightly, looking around the office with a mixture of fear and wonder. She had probably never seen such height, such space, or such opulence. And yet, in that room, surrounded by symbols of success, she seemed unaffected by the luxury. Her gaze was steady, her curiosity genuine. She didn't need the trappings of wealth to command attention, she simply existed, and in doing so, she demanded it. Alexander felt a strange mixture of awe and unease. He had built walls to protect himself, yet the presence of this little girl had rendered them irrelevant. The city below continued its relentless pace, oblivious to the quiet drama unfolding high above in the U.S. Bank Tower. Alexander allowed himself a rare pause, reflecting on the paradox of his existence. He had power, influence, and wealth beyond most imaginations, yet the moment a child's vulnerability entered his life, he felt powerless. Perhaps it was a reminder of what he had sacrificed along the way: the human connections, the simple joys, the uncalculated moments of life that could not be bought or commanded. A soft cough from Emily drew his attention back. She looked up at him, eyes questioning, almost as if she sensed the storm of thoughts in his mind. Alexander leaned forward slightly, resting his forearms on his desk. "Who are you?" he asked quietly, though he knew it was more than a question of name. It was a question of history, circumstance, and fate. Emily hesitated, her small fingers gripping her backpack straps tighter. The truth she carried, whatever it was, seemed heavy even for her young shoulders. In that moment, Alexander Royce realized something he had not admitted to himself for years: life's true power did not reside in wealth or authority. It resided in these fragile, fleeting intersections where one human could touch another, where vulnerability demanded empathy, and where a single, unexpected encounter could unravel even the most meticulously controlled life. Holding Emily in his office, overlooking the endless sprawl of Los Angeles, he understood that his story, his carefully constructed empire, was about to collide with hers in ways he could not yet foresee. The hum of the city, the distant sounds of traffic, and the faint echo of voices from the lobby below all faded into insignificance. Alexander's world had narrowed to the small girl before him, her presence a silent challenge to everything he thought he knew about life, power, and purpose. He realized, with a mixture of apprehension and fascination, that he was no longer just a CEO surveying the city from above. He was a man confronted by the unexpected, by humanity unpolished and untamed, and by a truth that had the power to change the course of both their lives. And as the Los Angeles sun climbed higher, casting long beams through the glass walls of the office, Alexander Royce understood that nothing in his life had prepared him for the journey that had begun the moment Emily fainted in his arms. He had built an empire, yes, but in the presence of a child whose world was nothing like his own, he glimpsed the fragility of human existence and the immense responsibility that came with seeing it, truly seeing it, for the first time in years. Before anyone could even guess her story, Emily's life had already been a battlefield of silent battles. The streets of Los Angeles outside the glittering towers offered no mercy for a child like her. Pershing Square, with its open expanse of concrete, scattered benches, and the distant hum of traffic, was meant to be a place for leisure, gatherings, and city life. For most, it was a momentary pause in a bustling day. For Emily, it was a backdrop to survival, a space where the invisible burdens of her world pressed down with relentless weight. She walked slowly, clutching the straps of her worn-out backpack as if it were the only anchor to her existence. Every step echoed against the hard pavement, a rhythm punctuated by the distant murmur of conversations, the scrape of shoes against stone, and the occasional bark of a stray dog. To the casual observer, she was just another child wandering through the square, perhaps lost or daydreaming. But those who looked closer could see the exhaustion etched into her posture, the way her small shoulders drooped under an invisible load heavier than any backpack could hold. Emily's mornings had begun long before sunrise, with a hurried breakfast that often consisted of stale bread or a hurried sip of lukewarm milk. School was both a sanctuary and a challenge, teachers who meant well, yet students who often reminded her of what she lacked. Her parents worked tirelessly, taking on jobs that offered no security, their faces often lined with worry, their hands roughened from effort. The house they shared was small, the walls thin, the rooms cramped. Yet even in such modest circumstances, love and hope had managed to survive, quietly pushing her forward when her own strength faltered. It was this quiet resilience, however, that had brought her to the doors of the U.S. Bank Tower that morning. She had been wandering downtown on an errand, something simple that had suddenly felt monumental under the weight of hunger, fatigue, and unspoken fears. The noise of the city, the glint of the glass buildings, and the polished floors were all foreign to her, reminders of a world she had only glimpsed in passing, a world that seemed impossibly distant yet tantalizingly close. Her fainting in Alexander Royce's arms was not an accident, it was a physical manifestation of years of silent struggle, a body finally succumbing to the weight of worry, exhaustion, and circumstance. As she sat on a bench in Pershing Square after being helped from the tower, Emily took a moment to breathe, her small chest rising and falling with effort. Around her, life continued with indifferent momentum. Office workers chatted briskly on their phones, tourists photographed the nearby historic buildings, and pigeons pecked at scattered crumbs, oblivious to the human dramas unfolding in their midst. For Emily, the noise was almost overwhelming, yet in some strange way, it grounded her. It reminded her that she was still moving forward, still surviving, even when the odds seemed insurmountable. The square had always been a place of contrast. Children from wealthier neighborhoods played on the grass, their laughter ringing out like bells against the concrete backdrop. Street performers juggled, sang, and entertained, collecting coins with hopeful smiles. And yet, Emily felt separate from it all, an observer who had little room to participate in joy, forced instead to navigate an existence dictated by scarcity, uncertainty, and the constant need to protect herself. She had learned early that life demanded vigilance. A wrong step, a missed opportunity, a single lapse in awareness could tip the delicate balance she maintained every day. Her thoughts drifted to her parents, to the dinners skipped to ensure they had enough to eat, to the long nights spent on homework by the dim glow of a borrowed lamp, and to the small victories that often went unnoticed. Finishing a school project, receiving a kind word from a teacher, or managing to navigate the city without mishap. These victories were private, hidden from the world, yet they had built within her a quiet strength that most adults would struggle to comprehend. Emily carried them like tiny, precious stones in the pocket of her heart, polished by effort, by perseverance, and by necessity. It was this strength that allowed her to rise after fainting in the CEO's arms, to regain composure despite the embarrassment and the sudden, overwhelming attention. She had lived much of her life in the shadows, learning to move carefully, to blend in, to survive without notice. Yet today, fate had thrust her into the light, unmasking her resilience in a way that even she could scarcely understand. For the first time, someone from a world so unlike hers had truly seen her, not as a statistic, not as a face in the crowd, but as a human being with depth, with story, with value. Emily's gaze wandered over Pershing Square, taking in the contrast of her life and the city around her. The towering buildings that housed the wealthy and powerful seemed almost unreachable, their windows reflecting sunlight in ways that dazzled and taunted simultaneously. And yet, she felt an unfamiliar flicker of possibility, a spark that whispered that perhaps her circumstances were not immutable, that there could be a life beyond constant struggle. The encounter with Alexander Royce, a man whose world had been entirely foreign, had cracked open a door she had thought permanently sealed. Every step she had taken in her young life had been measured, cautious, deliberate. She had learned to navigate hunger, to cope with uncertainty, to find small moments of joy amidst scarcity. But today, the rules of her existence had shifted, even if only slightly. A billionaire had caught her as she fell. A man who had everything had been rendered momentarily powerless in the face of her vulnerability. And somewhere deep inside, Emily recognized the significance of that moment, even if she could not yet articulate it. She remembered the whispered words of her mother that morning, "Be careful, Emily. The world can be harsh, but keep your head high." Those words had guided her for years, acting as a compass through streets that were both physically and emotionally challenging. And now, as she sat on the bench in Pershing Square, her backpack still clutched tightly, Emily realized that the world was larger, stranger, and more unpredictable than she had imagined. Yet within that unpredictability lay a hint of possibility, a promise that even the smallest, most fragile among us could intersect with lives we had only glimpsed from afar. The city continued around her, indifferent, yet somehow alive with quiet significance. Each passerby, each car, each distant siren was part of the rhythm that underscored Emily's struggle and resilience. And as she breathed in the crisp Los Angeles morning air, she felt a mixture of fear, hope, and determination. Life had been unkind, but it had also taught her the value of endurance, the power of silent perseverance, and the importance of noticing small opportunities when they appeared. Emily rose from the bench, her small frame resolute despite the faintness that lingered. Her journey had only just intersected with Alexander Royce's world, but the encounter had already begun to alter her understanding of possibility, of human connection, and of fate. The weight of her struggles remained, but now there was a hint of something new, the realization that paths could cross in extraordinary ways, that resilience could be acknowledged, and that even the smallest person could make an indelible impact on the lives of those who seemed untouchable. And so, as Pershing Square continued its indifferent dance of urban life, Emily walked forward, carrying her backpack, her quiet strength, and a newfound awareness that her story, long hidden, often overlooked, was about to enter a chapter she had never dared to imagine. Before anyone could grasp the significance of the morning's events, Alexander had led Emily away from the sterile corridors of the lobby to a place rarely touched by the outside world, the rooftop garden of the U.S. Bank Tower. Here, far above the relentless pulse of Los Angeles, the chaos of the city below seemed distant, softened by the golden glow of the setting sun. The garden was a sanctuary of greenery amidst steel and glass, a secret space designed to remind even the most ambitious executives of life beyond profit margins and balance sheets. But for Alexander and Emily, it became something far more intimate, a crossroads of fate. He carried her carefully across the tiled expanse, her small frame light against the strength of his arms, yet heavy with unspoken burdens. The wind stirred gently, brushing strands of her tangled hair across her face, and for a moment, the world seemed suspended. The hum of traffic, the distant sirens, the chatter of office workers below, all of it faded into insignificance. In that suspended moment, it was just Alexander, a man who had mastered control, and Emily, a child whose life had been defined by unpredictability and struggle. As they reached a shaded bench beneath the canopy of climbing vines, Alexander gently lowered her. The sunlight fell across her features, highlighting the faint smudges of dust on her cheeks and the trace of tears that had dried into subtle streaks. She blinked slowly, her eyes adjusting to the golden light. And then, their gazes met. It was instantaneous, electric in its subtlety. There was an unspoken recognition in her look, a depth that startled him, as though she carried a memory or a truth he had long buried. Alexander felt a shiver of something he hadn't experienced in years, an unfamiliar sense of purpose, entirely unrelated to contracts, mergers, or boardroom triumphs. Emily's small fingers gripped the edge of the bench, hesitant yet steady. Her breathing slowed, measured now, as if the rhythm of the rooftop, the warmth of the sun, and the presence of Alexander had created a temporary refuge from the chaos of her life. She studied him, not with fear, but with a quiet curiosity, as though weighing the man who had caught her in a moment of collapse. Her gaze held questions she had not yet learned to voice, questions about a world so different from her own, yet somehow tied to her in ways she could not yet comprehend. Alexander sat across from her, letting the city's panorama stretch behind him like a living painting. The sun painted the skyscrapers in gold and amber, casting long shadows across the rooftop garden. The lush greenery of the space contrasted sharply with the harsh lines of the towers, creating a sense of both intimacy and expansiveness. He watched her closely, taking in the subtle rise and fall of her chest, the way her small hands fidgeted with the straps of her backpack, the delicate tremor in her lips as she struggled to regain composure. Every detail seemed amplified in this quiet, suspended moment. There was something haunting about her eyes, Alexander realized. A familiarity that tugged at a corner of his memory, a shadow of recognition he could not immediately place. Perhaps it was the depth of her resilience, the raw honesty in her gaze, or the subtle courage that belied her age. Whatever it was, it unsettled him in a way he had not experienced in years. It reminded him of all the things he had lost in his pursuit of success. Connection, empathy, the unpredictability of genuine human interaction. And yet, it also reminded him of what he had been missing, the spark of life untouched by wealth, untouched by calculation, untouched by fear. The wind shifted, carrying the faint scent of jasmine from a nearby planter, and Alexander felt a strange calm settle over him. He realized that for the first time in years, he was present entirely in a moment that demanded nothing from him but attention, patience, and openness. There was no meeting to schedule, no deal to close, no hierarchy to navigate, just this child and the unspoken understanding that had formed between them. It was as if the universe had carved out a sliver of time and space for something profoundly human to unfold, outside the polished, controlled corridors of his life. Emily, too, seemed aware of the weight of the moment. Her body relaxed slowly, the tension that had gripped her in the lobby finally giving way to a tentative sense of security. She tilted her head slightly, studying Alexander as though trying to decipher the man who had caught her, who had held her safe from the hard marble floor and the indifferent crowd. There was intelligence in her gaze, a depth that seemed almost beyond her years, and Alexander found himself drawn in, compelled to meet her unspoken questions with patience and care he rarely afforded himself. They sat together in silence, yet it was a silence heavy with meaning. No words were necessary to convey the complexity of the moment, the collision of two worlds, the fragile human connection that had emerged from chaos, the subtle awareness that lives can intersect in ways that reshape both of them. Alexander felt an unfamiliar thrill, not the kind that came from wealth or achievement, but the kind that came from truly seeing another human being, and from being seen in return. The sun dipped lower, casting a final cascade of amber across the city skyline. Shadows lengthened across the rooftop, blending with the greenery and creating pockets of intimate space that seemed removed from the world below. In that soft, golden light, Alexander and Emily remained still, bound not by circumstance or obligation, but by an invisible thread of recognition and unspoken trust. There was a sense that this was more than chance, more than coincidence, something profound was stirring, though its full meaning remained just out of reach. Alexander found himself pondering questions he had long avoided. Who was this child? Why had fate placed her in his path? And, most importantly, what truth lay hidden beneath her fainting, beneath the fragile presence in his arms, that could unravel or redefine the ordered life he had built? He did not yet have answers, but he understood instinctively that the answers would demand courage, empathy, and a willingness to confront truths he had long ignored. Emily's eyes lingered on him, and for a fleeting moment, there was a flicker of recognition, an acknowledgement that their lives had intersected in a way that would not be easily forgotten. She did not speak, yet her presence spoke volumes: resilience, curiosity, vulnerability, and an unyielding spirit that had carried her through hardship. Alexander recognized it all, silently, with a growing awareness that this moment, though brief, had the power to shift the trajectory of both their lives. The city below continued its unrelenting rhythm, lights beginning to twinkle as the sun fell behind the horizon. Yet on that rooftop, above the noise, Alexander and Emily remained suspended in a moment of profound connection. Words had not yet been exchanged, but understanding had been forged. It was a bond delicate and powerful, immediate and mysterious, one that hinted at truths neither was prepared to confront fully, but one that promised transformation nonetheless. As the golden light faded and the shadows deepened, Alexander knew one thing with certainty: life as he had known it, controlled and calculated, was about to change. Emily's presence, fragile yet potent, had awakened something long dormant within him, a sense of purpose, empathy, and curiosity that no boardroom, no contract, and no fortune could ever provide. And in that realization, both he and the little girl lingered, silently acknowledging that this first connection was the beginning of something far greater, a story neither could yet fully imagine but one that would shape them irrevocably. Before anyone could predict how their worlds would collide again, Alexander found himself walking alongside Emily through the winding paths of Griffith Park, the city lights of Los Angeles twinkling faintly in the distance below. The night was cool, with a gentle breeze carrying the scent of pine and wildflowers, and the stars above shone with clarity, like tiny lanterns scattered across the velvet sky. The observatory loomed in the distance, its domed silhouette a silent guardian over the sprawling city. For Alexander, the walk was not about exercise or leisure, it was a deliberate step away from the skyscrapers and deals that usually dictated his life, a chance to see the world through a lens he had long forgotten existed. Emily walked beside him cautiously, her small hands tucked into the pockets of her worn jacket. The familiar shadows of Griffith Park seemed to mirror the caution in her demeanor. She had never wandered here alone, nor with someone she barely knew yet now trusted enough to walk beside. Each step she took was careful, almost tentative, as if measuring the safety of the path ahead. Alexander noticed every nuance. The slight pause before she stepped over a tree root, the way her eyes darted at sudden sounds, the rhythm of her breathing, and he realized how deeply the city had shaped her resilience. She carried caution like armor, and yet, beneath it, there was a fragility he wanted to understand, a truth she had yet to reveal. As they walked, Emily began to speak, her voice soft but steady. She recounted small stories of her life, mornings that began before the sun, when she had to prepare herself for school while her parents worked long hours, afternoons spent navigating crowded streets to reach a library where she could borrow books and escape into worlds far removed from her own, evenings where she returned to a modest apartment filled with worry and quiet love, yet often lacking the basics most children took for granted. Alexander listened intently, his eyes absorbing every detail, his mind painting vivid images of a world he had rarely glimpsed beyond news headlines and philanthropic endeavors. Her words revealed courage that defied her years. Emily described moments of fear she had faced alone, decisions she had made to protect herself or help her family, and the small acts of kindness she had encountered along the way, a neighbor offering a meal, a teacher who stayed late to help with homework, strangers who unknowingly lent hope through smiles or simple gestures. These fragments of her life, shared cautiously at first, began to build a mosaic of character, resilience, and determination that left Alexander quietly in awe. He realized that this little girl, so fragile in appearance, had navigated a world far harsher than anything he had ever experienced, and yet she carried herself with dignity and strength that demanded respect. Yet, despite her openness, there was a shadow in her stories. A fragment she would not speak aloud, a detail she skirted with subtle hesitation or abrupt silence. When Alexander inquired gently, asking about moments of deeper struggle or sources of pain, Emily would shift her gaze toward the distant city lights, shrug lightly, or change the subject. Her eyes, however, betrayed the weight of a secret, a hidden truth she was not yet ready to share. Alexander felt the tension between them deepen, not a rift, but a quiet awareness of the invisible barrier that separated their worlds. He sensed that beneath the tales of courage and perseverance lay something far more profound, a truth that had shaped her life in ways even she may not fully understand. They reached a small clearing near the observatory, where the stars above seemed closer, almost tangible against the deep indigo sky. Alexander stopped, letting Emily catch up, and together they gazed upward. The constellations, familiar yet distant, reflected the vast divide between their experiences. To him, they were a reminder of ambition and legacy, of nights spent planning empires and calculating risks. To Emily, perhaps, they were silent witnesses to hardships endured, to dreams nurtured quietly, to hope preserved in moments of darkness. Alexander realized that the stars, like Emily herself, carried stories unseen by most, illuminating, guiding, and offering perspective beyond the immediate struggles of life below. Emily finally allowed a brief pause, her small fingers brushing against a railing as if steadying herself. She spoke again, though carefully, revealing moments of vulnerability, a time she had gone hungry to ensure her younger sibling had enough to eat, the anxiety of navigating a world that often judged her by circumstance rather than character, and the exhaustion of carrying responsibilities too heavy for her age. Each word carried weight, and Alexander felt the gravity of her experiences settle over him. He had thought he understood struggle, yet compared to the quiet battles Emily faced daily, his challenges seemed transient, almost trivial. The tension of the unspoken detail persisted. Alexander's curiosity grew, tempered by concern. He understood that trust could not be rushed, some truths demanded patience and care. He refrained from pressing her, instead offering a steady presence, a silent reassurance that she could reveal what she chose, when she chose. The connection between them deepened in those quiet moments, built not on questions and answers alone, but on presence, empathy, and shared humanity. The silence between them was as significant as her stories, carrying the unspoken acknowledgement of shared understanding and respect. The stars above seemed to pulse faintly with their own rhythm, a slow heartbeat in the vast darkness. Alexander thought about the improbability of their meeting. The collision of two lives so different yet drawn together by circumstance, chance, or perhaps something greater. He felt the responsibility of knowing that Emily had entrusted a fragment of her story to him, and he vowed silently to honor that trust. The hidden truth she carried, whatever it was, demanded sensitivity and care, and he resolved to be patient, to allow the layers of her life to unfold in their own time. As they continued along the quiet paths, the observatory rising behind them like a sentinel, Alexander's thoughts turned inward. He reflected on the contrast between his life and hers, the privileges he had taken for granted, the choices he had made in pursuit of success, the loneliness that often accompanied power. In Emily's presence, he recognized the fragility of human existence, the resilience that often goes unnoticed, and the profound impact one life could have on another. He realized that understanding her truth would not just reveal her story, but perhaps illuminate aspects of his own life that had long been obscured by ambition and routine. Emily glanced briefly at him, a mixture of caution and tentative trust in her gaze. Alexander offered a small, reassuring smile, one that carried no judgment, only recognition of her courage and respect for her silence. In that moment, under the blanket of stars, the invisible barrier between their worlds felt slightly less insurmountable. There was a shared awareness that the journey ahead, of truth, understanding, and connection, would be challenging, yet meaningful. The night air wrapped around them, cool and comforting, as they continued walking side by side through Griffith Park, their paths intertwined in a way neither could yet fully understand, but both would feel profoundly. The city below continued its constant rhythm, unaware of the quiet revelations occurring above. Alexander and Emily walked onward, their shadows long and intertwined beneath the starlight, carrying fragments of stories, resilience, and secrets yet to be revealed. And as the observatory loomed closer, Alexander knew that the truth Emily carried would one day surface, a revelation capable of altering everything they thought they knew about each other, and themselves. Before anyone could anticipate what was about to unfold, Alexander led Emily into the quiet grandeur of the Los Angeles Central Library. The building, both public and intimate, carried the weight of countless stories within its walls, stories of triumph, tragedy, and ordinary lives transformed by circumstance. Marble floors echoed softly under their footsteps, and the warm light from the tall windows illuminated the rows of books, creating a sense of calm that contrasted sharply with the storm of emotions Alexander could already feel stirring inside him. Emily clutched something in her small hands, the crumpled edges of a piece of paper pressing against her chest as if it were both shield and confession. Her fingers trembled slightly, betraying the nervousness she had fought to conceal. She had rehearsed this moment countless times in her mind, wondering how he would react, what words might escape him, and whether the revelation she was about to share would change everything, or shatter the fragile connection they had begun to build. Alexander, sensing her hesitation, slowed his steps and guided her to a quiet alcove between towering shelves of encyclopedias and novels. The library's hushed atmosphere offered them both a cocoon, a place removed from the rest of the world where truth could finally emerge. For a long moment, neither spoke. Alexander studied her carefully, noting the subtle tension in her shoulders, the small, almost imperceptible shift of her gaze toward the floor, and the way her lips pressed together in a mix of fear and determination. He understood, even without words, that what she was about to reveal was more than a story, it was a piece of history that tied her existence to his own in a way he could scarcely imagine. He silently prepared himself, bracing for a truth that had the power to disrupt the carefully constructed life he had maintained for decades. Emily's fingers finally unfolded the crumpled paper, revealing a message written in small, careful handwriting. Alexander leaned in, his eyes scanning the words as she spoke softly, her voice almost a whisper. Each line carried weight, each letter a testament to hidden connections and choices made long before he had ever imagined encountering this child. The revelation was immediate and staggering. A tie that connected her family, her struggles, and her resilience to events and decisions from his own past. The coincidence, or perhaps fate, was impossible, yet undeniable. Alexander's initial reaction was silence. His mind raced, flipping through memories he had long buried, names, dates, decisions made in fleeting moments that now took on entirely new meaning. The world of the billionaire, with its calculated risks, boardroom strategies, and carefully curated successes, collided unexpectedly with the struggles of the little girl in front of him. The juxtaposition was jarring, almost surreal. Here was Emily, whose life had been defined by hardship, standing in the quiet library with a piece of paper that held the key to a connection he had never known existed. The crumpled note revealed that Emily's parents had once worked in a small capacity for one of Alexander's earlier ventures, a project he had long forgotten amidst the hundreds of deals and decisions he had made over the years. Decisions made without thought, actions taken for profit or efficiency, had indirectly shaped Emily's life in ways he had never anticipated. The revelation struck him with a mixture of shock, disbelief, and an unexpected tenderness. It was as if the universe had conspired to bring them together, to force recognition of consequences that had long gone unnoticed, and to illuminate a thread connecting their lives that had been invisible until this precise moment. Alexander's eyes lingered on Emily's face, searching for her response, for a sign that she had anticipated his reaction. She looked up at him with a mixture of vulnerability and quiet courage, the kind of courage born from years of navigating a world that often demanded more than she could give. Her trust in him, in sharing this secret, weighed heavily on him, amplifying the gravity of the moment. For the first time in years, he felt raw, unfiltered emotion, not the controlled satisfaction of a deal closed, but the profound recognition of human connection, of impact, of responsibility. The library's silence was profound, broken only by the occasional soft rustle of a turning page somewhere far in the distance. Alexander felt the enormity of what had just been revealed, a flood of suppressed feelings rising to the surface, guilt, empathy, wonder, and even a flicker of joy at the unexpected intimacy of the moment. He realized that no wealth, no empire, no accolade had ever brought him this kind of clarity or this deep, visceral sense of purpose. The intertwining of his past choices with Emily's present life was a revelation that redefined his understanding of influence, legacy, and the true meaning of connection. Emily's story continued in fragmented sentences, each one revealing a facet of her life shaped, in part, by his past actions. She spoke of moments where opportunity had slipped just out of reach, of hardships that could have been mitigated had circumstances been slightly different, and of small acts of resilience that allowed her to keep moving forward. Alexander listened intently, absorbing every word, realizing that his decisions, made without malice or consideration for long-term impact, had rippled across time to touch this life so intimately. The awareness struck him profoundly. His world of strategy and control was bound inexorably to hers, a reminder of the unseen consequences of every action, however trivial it might have seemed at the time. The more Emily spoke, the more Alexander felt a shift within himself. The carefully constructed walls he had built around his emotions, the distance he maintained between himself and the consequences of his wealth, began to crumble. The revelation was not just about her life, it was about him, about the gaps in his understanding of the world he had influenced, and about the potential to act differently moving forward. He realized that wealth and power, impressive as they might be, had never offered the fulfillment that came from truly seeing another human being, understanding their story, and embracing the responsibility intertwined with that knowledge. Finally, Emily fell silent, allowing the weight of her revelation to settle between them. Alexander, still holding the crumpled paper, took a deep breath, letting the enormity of the moment wash over him. The world of the billionaire and the struggles of the little girl had collided in a single, intimate space, the library, a place of stories, knowledge, and reflection. Surrounded by shelves that held countless narratives, he understood, with an almost painful clarity, that his own story had been incomplete until now. The revelation had done more than uncover a hidden connection, it had transformed the way Alexander saw both himself and the world around him. The intricacies of fate, the weight of past choices, and the potential for redemption and action were now inescapably real. In Emily's trembling hands, he saw the opportunity for understanding, for guidance, and for connection that transcended mere coincidence. And as the quiet hum of the library settled around them, Alexander realized that this was the beginning of a chapter that would redefine everything he thought he knew about life, responsibility, and the true measure of success. He folded the crumpled paper gently, as though handling not just a piece of paper but the fragile, intricate truth of a life intertwined with his own. For the first time, he understood that wealth could not measure the depth of impact, and power could not quantify the resonance of human connection. That realization, silent yet profound, marked a turning point. Not only in Emily's life, but in his as well. In the quiet, hallowed halls of the Los Angeles Central Library, surrounded by stories of countless others, Alexander finally grasped that his life had been waiting for this moment of revelation to feel truly complete. Before the sun had fully risen, Alexander and Emily found themselves walking along the quiet sands of Santa Monica Pier. The early morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of salt and the soft rhythm of the Pacific waves crashing gently against the shore. Seagulls called in the distance, their cries echoing faintly over the water, and the world seemed to hold its breath in the calm, golden prelude to dawn. For Alexander, accustomed to boardrooms, flashing city lights, and the hum of relentless activity, the stillness of the pier was a revelation, a rare moment where life's simplest pleasures took center stage. Emily walked beside him, her small feet sinking into the wet sand with each step. The ocean's chill brushed against her skin, and yet she moved with a newfound confidence, her shoulders lifted, her gaze forward. The events of the past days had shifted something within her, the burden she had carried silently for years now felt lighter, tempered by the knowledge that her story had been heard and acknowledged. Each ripple of the tide seemed to mirror the subtle changes in her world, a rhythm of renewal, a quiet promise of possibilities that had once seemed impossible. The pier itself was nearly empty, save for a few early risers and fishermen tending to lines that trailed into the shimmering water. Alexander's gaze drifted over the familiar landmarks, the Ferris wheel silhouetted against the dawn, the colorful booths that would later hum with laughter, the wooden planks stretching over the gentle waves. He had seen this place many times in the past, yet never like this, never with someone who had altered his understanding of life so profoundly. It was not the thrill of the view, nor the nostalgia of the ocean air, but the shared presence of Emily that transformed the scene into something transcendent, something that carried both reflection and hope. They stopped for a moment, standing side by side near the edge where the waves lapped against the pier's supports. Emily kicked at the sand gently, watching the grains scatter into the surf, a small smile tugging at her lips. Alexander observed her, noting the subtle joy in her expression, the lightness in her stance, and the quiet courage that had carried her through years of hardship. It was a stark contrast to the timid girl who had fainted in his arms weeks before. The transformation was not sudden, but it was undeniable. The resilience she had always possessed now radiated outward, touching the world around her, and Alexander could not help but feel a swell of pride and wonder at the person she had become. He spoke softly, breaking the silence that had settled comfortably around them. "You've come so far, Emily," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "You've faced more than most adults ever will, and yet here you are, standing stronger than ever." She glanced at him, her eyes bright, and nodded slightly. Words were unnecessary beyond that acknowledgement. The depth of their bond, the shared understanding of struggle, truth, and courage, carried meaning far beyond language. In that moment, the divide between billionaire and little girl vanished, replaced by the humanity and connection that neither wealth nor circumstance could define. The waves continued their endless dance against the shore, each one washing away the remnants of fear, doubt, and past struggle. Alexander felt a strange, liberating shift within himself as he watched Emily laugh softly at the way the surf tickled her toes. The magnitude of their journey, the hidden truths revealed, the connection forged through shared vulnerability, it had altered the lens through which he viewed success, ambition, and purpose. For the first time in years, power and wealth seemed secondary, almost trivial, compared to the impact one could have on a life through understanding, guidance, and compassion. Emily's gaze turned toward the horizon, where the first hint of the sun's golden orb peaked above the waterline. The colors spread gradually, painting the sky with shades of pink, orange, and violet. Alexander followed her line of sight, feeling the warmth of possibility wash over him. The sun's ascent mirrored the changes in their lives, gradual, inevitable, and illuminating truths that had long remained in shadow. It was a quiet dawn, yet it carried the weight of transformation, the kind of change that reshaped perspectives, nurtured hope, and opened doors to futures previously unimaginable. They continued walking along the pier, each step a rhythm of reconciliation with the past and anticipation of what lay ahead. Emily spoke sparingly, her words measured but imbued with newfound confidence. She recounted dreams she had once thought unreachable, college, travel, a career that allowed her to help others like herself, and Alexander listened, absorbing every hope and aspiration. He realized that his role was no longer that of a distant observer or distant benefactor, but a participant in shaping opportunities and nurturing potential. The power to influence was no longer abstract, it was tangible, immediate, and profoundly rewarding. As they reached the pier's end, the ocean stretching endlessly before them, Alexander knelt briefly to pick up a smooth, rounded stone, tossing it into the water. The splash echoed faintly, a small yet symbolic gesture of letting go. Letting go of old notions of control, of ambition divorced from empathy, of the life he had built without fully understanding its consequences on others. Emily watched, smiling softly, and did the same, sending her own stone into the tide. The act, simple as it was, marked the culmination of their journey together, acknowledgement, release, and the courage to move forward with clarity and purpose. The light grew stronger, illuminating the pier, the water, and their intertwined shadows. Alexander and Emily stood side by side, their faces glowing with the early sun. There was a sense of completeness, a realization that the twists of fate, the collisions of disparate worlds, and the truths revealed along the way had forged something enduring. Emily's path was no longer dictated solely by hardship, and Alexander's life, despite its prior successes, had found a deeper measure of meaning. They had transformed each other, subtly but irrevocably, through empathy, connection, and the willingness to embrace vulnerability. The seagulls wheeled overhead, the surf whispered against the sand, and the early morning air carried the promise of possibility. Emily reached for Alexander's hand briefly, a gesture of trust and shared experience that spoke volumes about the bond they now shared. Alexander, feeling the weight and significance of the moment, returned the gesture, understanding that success was no longer about boardrooms, contracts, or influence, but about lives touched, hope nurtured, and the courage to acknowledge truths both hidden and revealed. As the sun rose fully above the Pacific, casting a brilliant path of light across the water, they stood together in quiet reflection. The world, vast and unpredictable, seemed somehow more navigable, more intimate, and more filled with promise. Destiny, in its subtle and relentless way, had brought two unlikely souls together, and in that convergence, life had been irrevocably changed. The smallest moments, the fainting in a lobby, the revelations shared, the quiet walks under starlight, had led to a dawn of understanding, compassion, and transformation. Alexander looked at Emily, a deep sense of gratitude swelling within him. "This is only the beginning," he said softly. She nodded, understanding without words that the journey ahead would be shaped by courage, choice, and shared purpose. And as the waves continued their endless rhythm, lapping gently at the shore, they walked forward together, side by side, a testament to the power of human connection, the unpredictability of fate, and the enduring truth that even the smallest encounters can change the course of a life forever. In that golden light, on the sands of Santa Monica Pier, Alexander and Emily embraced not just the present moment, but the profound impact of their shared journey. Life had shifted, perspectives had deepened, and hope had taken root. And as the sun climbed higher over the Pacific, it illuminated a path filled with possibility, compassion, and the enduring reminder that sometimes, destiny arrives quietly, transforming ordinary days into extraordinary beginnings. If this story touched your heart, imagine how many more lives we can change together. Don't let this be the last moment you feel inspired. Hit that like button, share this video, and subscribe for more powerful millionaire stories that prove compassion is worth more than gold. Your next story could change someone's life.